Good morning and welcome to another breakfast with me, the Reverend David Perry. I do thank you for joining me and my thoughts this morning. I've said it before, but it's probably worth my saying it again, that these thoughts are my thoughts. They represent no one except me. And as I think things through with you, they might not even represent me tomorrow, but they probably will. The point of thinking about these things and the point of my telling you what I'm thinking is simply that we do think. Thinking about things is what separates us from the rest of creation, I suspect. I see thoughts flit across my dog's brow from time to time, but they tend to be rascally thoughts, I'm sure. What can he steal? What can he eat? What can he steal? Sometimes, though, there's a cleverer thought. How can he get into the house when I've locked him out? Or how can he get out when I've locked him in? How can he get to the cat who's teasing him from the other side of the garden? Or, more likely, what can he steal? He's a clever dog, all right, but clever is as clever does, and although he's a dog, he will never learn Greek and he will never appreciate Shakespeare. He might be clever, but he is, after all, a dog. But as humans, we have a glimmer of God in us, so we can do more than think about what to eat or steal, or we should anyway. We can conjure with creation's wonders. We can try to figure out what it's all about. Good luck with that. However, this morning I was reading the letter of St. Paul to Titus. It comes after my favourite piece of the Bible, which is St. Paul's letter to Timothy, and I'll explain another time why that is so interesting to me. The letter to Titus was written sometime towards the end of Paul's life, or perhaps just after it. How can Paul have written a letter just after he died? Well, it's simple. He probably didn't write it. It was probably written by someone of the school of St. Paul, naming himself St. Paul for gravity. A lot of painters used to do that. They used to name themselves after important artists, even though they themselves were only students at the school of the artist. Lends them gravity and it gives a bit of publicity to the painter. Anyway, I'm digressing. The letter to Titus. Titus, by the way, lived a few years after Christ did. He eventually became the Bishop of Crete, which is where he was when this letter was written to him. Titus's head was removed in about 800 and something and taken to Rome. It's still in the Basilica, St. Mark's Basilica in Rome. I digress again. That's the problem with the Bible. It's so interesting. Anyway, back to what I wanted to talk about. This letter to Titus. It's short. It's only about 3 chapters long. It doesn't quite take up 2 pages of the Bible. And if you haven't read any of the Bible yet, then maybe the letter to Titus is a good start. But in this letter, Paul, or whoever it was, is trying to get Titus in Crete to do something special. He says that he's left Titus behind in Crete for this job. We don't know whether that's true, but Titus was in Crete. He says this: the Cretans are starting to move away from the true teaching of Christ. They're teaching each other falsities and they're leading each other astray. They're drifting from wholesome, righteous living to drinking, partying, sex-filled lives of sin and debauchery. Actually, now I think about it, it sounds a bit like a Club 1830 holiday to Crete these days, and actually it sounds rather fun. But Paul isn't interested in fun. In fact, he might be considered to be wary of fun, or at least this sort of fun. He's not a killjoy, but he does know the real price of things. And the real price of a 20 quid Ryanair 1830 trip to Crete for cheap beer and fleshy pleasures isn't just 20 quid. It's the lack of self-worth, it's the self-loathing, it's the fact you might wake up with a bad head and a very bad tattoo the morning after. Paul understands that these things have a cost well above the ticket price. Maybe that doesn't bother you. Maybe it should. Maybe we should at least think about it. But Paul says something that really struck with me in chapter 3. In verse 8 and the following ones, he says this: "This is a trustworthy saying, and I want to stress these things, so that those who have trusted in God may be careful to devote themselves to doing what is good. These things are excellent and profitable for everyone. But avoid foolish controversies and genealogies and arguments and quarrels about the law, because they are unprofitable and useless. Warn a divisive person once, and then warn them a second time, and after that have nothing more to do with them. You may be sure that such people are warped and sinful. They are self-condemned." These are harsh, strong words, and the phrase "this is a trustworthy saying" crops up again and again in the Bible, and it really just means listen to this really well, because I might be asking questions later. It's just a heads up that what's coming is important and we should listen to it. And then he says two other things that we need to think about, I think. First of all, he says that by devoting ourselves to good things, we profit everyone. He doesn't say that those who believe in God should do good things for those who believe in God. He says if you believe in God, you should do good things for all people. Why does he speak only to those who believe in God? Well, probably because they're the ones who are reading his letter, I suppose. If you don't believe in God, you might not be reading his letter. But the point is this: the good works will benefit absolutely everyone. Even the beer-swilling, girl-chasing thugs will benefit if we do good work. And why should we help those who won't help themselves? Because we should, says St. Paul. We're all God's children. It's just that some don't know it yet. Then Paul says the second thing of astonishing worthiness. He says, avoid pointless controversy. In other words, if someone asks you why they should help everyone else, even the beer-swilling, girl-chasing thugs, then you just say once, well, you should. We're all God's children. That's the right thing to do. And if they argue again, you say again, well, we should. It's the right thing to do. And if they say a third time, then you go, okay, if you're not listening, you're not listening. I'm not going to have an argument with you. Arguing with a fool, says St. Paul, only reduces you both to foolishness. You tell them once, you tell them twice, and then you walk away. But don't stop doing the good works. Paul says more than that, though. He actually says, walk away and have nothing more to do with them, because they will drag you down. They will make you feel bad, and they themselves are self-condemned. You might dive into a pool to save someone who is drowning, but would you dive into a pool to save someone who is drowning if he's tied rocks around his feet? He will drag you down. So that's the self-condemned, people who have a brain but refuse to think about things. And anyone can think about things. You don't need a clever brain to think about things. You don't need A-levels or a degree to think about God. You just need to use the brain that God gave you. You just need to have an open mind. Of course, after a lifetime's thought, you might die still either not knowing whether or not God exists, or in fact you might have concluded quite surely that he doesn't. And that's okay, so long as you've thought about it. I know God accepts it as okay because Jesus tells us that is the case. And if it's good enough for Jesus and for God, then I'm sure it's good enough for me. But the one thing I'm sure is not good enough for God, or for me, or for you, is not to think about it. God is not all right with us not using our brains. He gave us brains well above the ones he gave a dog, so that we can think thoughts well above the thoughts a dog has. And I think even a dog expects us to do that. So are you a dog or a human? Will you think of more than what to steal or eat today? I hope so, my friends. I really do. But until the next time, all blessings upon you. Now, where did I leave my biscuit?